If Idaho law is being consistent, we're not favoring abortion companies or providers in education, and so doing this extends that. Abortion providers have an interest in people get more abortions. They make a lot of money off it. They need to make money to keep running, and one of the primary ways they make money is through abortions. It's fair for the Idaho person to say, no, I don't want you to educate in that way. If I'm going to send my kids to public school, this is how I'm going to vote. Good morning, Idaho. Welcome to the local Yocal Idaho podcast, where we talk about what is going on in the wonderful state of Idaho. For those tuning in for the first time, I'd like to have a little banter before we get into the stories, but I understand if you're short on time, so we have provided the timestamps in the description so you can jump straight to the stories that you are interested in. For those that stayed with us for the banter, welcome. Glad to have you here with me today. I hope you have all had a great week, granted with all the smoke and everything. Hopefully you're not either having headaches or different respiratory issues. I know here in the southern part of the state, and I've heard a little bit even up north, it's been a bit smoky. Thankfully, it doesn't affect me that much, but I know some others that it can cause headaches and different stuff and things. Or if you're from just out of state, it might be like, oh my goodness, why all the smoke? Which, if you're curious about that, the midweek report coming up this week, I think has a report in it about that, or you could just message me on Twitter. Or I'm trying on Twitter right now to post a bunch of the different stuff. The Boise National Weather Service and a couple others will post like maps and heat maps where the smoke and stuff is moving and things. So I'm trying to post that there. But suffice to say, we don't have hurricanes. We don't have very many earthquakes, right? But we do have fires. So that's the one thing you have to pay for all the other natural disasters that we don't have to worry about too much here in Idaho is fire season. But you'll get used to it. It usually goes by. Granted, I think this year has been a little bit higher than normal. It's been a bit more than it used to be in the past. Granted, a lot of that has to do from Oregon, from what I was reading. This last week, we got our full taste of that with a thunderstorm that came through and lightning strikes, and it started a bunch of fires and stuff that they're trying to put out. And then for those of you in the Gem County area, specifically near Sweet, I hope you're staying safe, because I know there's a fire pretty close there that's been blazing. It's such a pretty area. It's sad to hear about that. But also, you may have noticed that there is a new logo on the channel. I would love to hear your thoughts on that. We were dinking around with that, and I had my editor, and we were doing some work and things, and he was like, what if I change this? And what if I do that? And we were messing with it. I was like, I kept chewing on it. We've had it for about a week or two now. But I said, I think it does look better. I think it looks nicer. There's a little bit more contrast. People can see it a lot better. You'll have to let me know. I should have rolled it out on Saturday. I'm recording this Friday. There'll probably be some stuff mulling around. I'll probably post something there on Twitter. But really curious to hear your thoughts on it, if you like or dislike it. If so, why, other things. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, we want to make a product that serves you well as the consumer. Also, this may be the last Sunday show as you know it. If you remember from listening to previous Sunday shows and the Morning Banter, this probably will be one of the last ones. We're transitioning to doing some other stuff. There's going to be components like the Idaho Bill breakdown stuff. We'll continue on. We're working on getting those split out, stuff like that. But as you know it, the whole package Sunday show with 2 stories and maybe a reoccurring series and the Morning Banter, a part of that will evolve into a new format. You'll see different components of it pop up, especially as we're transitioning to Substack as being a thing there. So please bear with us. If you have any ideas or elements that you really liked about the Sunday show, you want to make sure that we don't forget or leave off to the wayside, please let me know, because your feedback really does help shape the show. But that's it. I don't have too much more to say besides complaining about smoke and channel updates. So we'll move into our first story here. Moving into our first story today, and as you can guess, it is an Idaho Bill breakdown. As many of you have probably noticed, the legacy media continues to buzz about the effects of House Bill 710 and how it is banning books, which, if you don't know what that bill is and why they're buzzing about it, and you're interested, we covered that in our last Idaho Bill breakdown we did last week. Surprisingly, the bill we're going to be talking about today is very similar in that it regulates what can be taught, but hasn't gotten nearly as much press time as House Bill 710. The bill in question is House Bill 666, related to sex education and abortion. In this specific Idaho Bill breakdown, we'll be looking at how the bill attempts to remove abortion providers from the conversation on sex ed in schools. We'll see what restrictions are already in place and how this bill closes a loophole that shouldn't have been there in the first place. But first, let's look at what the bill actually says. House Bill 666 was sponsored by Representative Bruce Skog in the House and Senator Kevin Cook in the Senate. Its intended purpose is to prohibit any individual or organization that is a provider of abortions from furnishing any materials or instruction related to sex education curricula. As for how it goes about this, there is a new provision that is adding to Section 8707 of the Idaho Code. It is prohibiting public schools from allowing any individual or organization that is a provider of abortion to furnish materials or instruction related to sex education curricula. Now, to give a little bit of a backdrop to this bill so we understand what came before it, prior to this bill, Idaho law already prohibited certain abortion-related activities in school-based health clinics and public institutions of higher education. Those restrictions were performing abortions, counseling in favor of abortions, referring for abortions, and dispensing emergency contraception, except in the case of rape. The law also has prohibited state agencies and schools from using state funds for abortions or emergency contraception distribution. So you have that element there. But in short, what this bill is doing is adding a new provision to Idaho's existing restrictions on abortion-related topics in schools, saying that individuals and organizations that provide abortion or prohibit them from giving input on sex ed curricula. So coming into our application of what this all means and the takeaway you should get from this, I think it's pretty easy to make the argument that this is just closing a loophole that already existed, independent of if you disagree with the existing restrictions that were had. I think those are, performing abortions, counseling in favor of abortions, referring for abortions, and dispensing emergency contraception or things like that. If Idaho law is being consistent, we're not favoring abortion companies or providers, shall we say, in education. And so doing this kind of extends that. And I also think it removes that vested interest abortion providers may have, as much as you say they are the most holy institution on earth or something like the church, which the church has its own faults. They have an interest in having more people get more abortions. They make a lot of money off it. They're not per se a government institution. They are private now. They were spun off from that, and they need to make money to keep running. And one of the primary ways they make money, and you can go look out the statistics, don't gripe at me, is through abortions. For example, we don't let smoking companies decide what's going on or have influence on smoking studies, because then they could skew the results or put pressure on doctors to have an effect. So I think this, similar with education, is a good thing in closing a loophole there. But there may be some other objections out there you may hear or you might have yourself. I wrote down a couple that I went out and researched and found. The first one is that schools are to teach you how to think and not what to think. More a thought process of, okay, you should teach the person how to think about reality and perceive the world around them, not what to think. And we do. With logic and systematic theology, we want to teach people how to think and reason and understand and process the world around them so they're not caught off guard. But there's another side of, I don't sit there and teach you per se when you're young, or especially at a teaching institution, that, oh yeah, that sky, this is why you think it's blue, and that's how you should think about it. No, I sit there and say the objective truth is that the sky is blue. It's blue because of these things. None of that is about thinking. I am objectively telling you a fact and telling your brain to take it as such. And we've gotten a little skewed on that on modern educational systems in the West, that it's more about teaching how to think, not what to think. And there's a part there where both of them, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we swung way too far the other way, that we can't say what's objectively true. We just have to teach you how to think and then present the facts to you, rather than saying, no, this is fact, this is true, and you should take it as such. And abortion, maybe in some extreme case, I'm not advocating for it, but there are maybe in some extreme situations, you have a better argument that abortion might be a viable thing. I personally would disagree with that, but it is better to say objectively, it's better to have more image bearers of God on this planet and for us to fulfill what God intended for us, that it's good to have human beings. Human beings aren't a scourge on the earth or something. The second objection that might come up is that this may limit the resources and information available for sex education curricula. And to that, I would say, yes, when I am studying something, if I'm studying, I don't know, let's go with rocket science, right? When I'm studying rocket science, I don't need and shouldn't pull from psychology. Engineering does not care anything about how the human brain, per se, on a rocket's design of getting from point A to point B, from Earth to Moon. It doesn't care. It doesn't matter what the psychology of a human being there. It is more about the design and the function of propellants and physics and your apogee and different things to get you to that point. And so for a certain example here, sex education is about how to well understand how sexual activity works, what are the consequences, so you're well informed about one of the I think, building blocks of what makes us human at certain times, right? God made us sexual creatures, and that's a good and that's a wonderful thing. But for us to put other things that aren't true, and I would argue that the most of Idahoans would agree they don't believe to be true about educating the majority, I think it's 80 or 70% of Idahoans go to public schools, to educate all of them in a presupposition that most of us as Idahoans don't agree with, I think shouldn't be done. And it's fair for the Idaho person to say, no, I don't want you to educate in that way. And if I'm going to send my kids to public school, this is how I'm going to vote. Which also answers my second sub-bit that abortion is part of sex education. Abortion is the process of ending sex, in a sense, the process that brings forth that fruit, that you have the love between a man and woman, and it's so amazing that it produces a human being out of that. And abortion stops that process. And more than anything, I don't think it should be that if we understand our definition of sex and education correctly as we've gone through above. I've already answered that. I won't spend too much time on it. We've already gone through that with the question above that, but I just still wanted to address it briefly. And that brings us into the last part, what this means for the average Idahoan like you, right? For a student, the high school student may see more restrictions on information in sex education class and being like, why this or this isn't here, mainly saying that abortion providers shouldn't have a say or effect on what's being added into that curriculum. For parents, which that makes up about like 80 to 70% of all the kids in the state, you'll be able to sleep a little bit better knowing that teenagers in public schools won't be taught that abortion is an option, period, but more rather in a more abstinent-focused education on sex, which is the more traditional one that the West has had for a pretty long time, in my opinion. As for educators, teachers, and school administrators will need to ensure that sex education material and guest speakers and stuff related to it comply with this restriction, aren't connected to Planned Parenthood. And for the abortion provider, they are people too. Don't worry, they need a salvation as well. Organizations that provide abortion services will be barred from participating in school sex education programs, which, shocker, I don't think that is a bad thing. Which, hey, if you enjoyed that or disagree and you want to follow more of our content to fight with me more, subscribe or follow us on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter to stay up to date on all things Idaho. For even more content and to support us, check out our Substack. We're building that out, getting ready to write some cool stuff over there. Also, if you found our content valuable, please like and share it with friends and family. Your support helps us spread the word about our beautiful state and keep Idahoans like you informed and engaged. Thank you for listening and being part of the local Yocal Idaho community. Now, on to the next segment. Which, speaking of education, it is that time of year. We are in August at the moment, and that means I think we're only, when this releases, maybe 1 to 2 weeks away from public schools firing up. But there are some changes that you'll see coming back into it. For those that are longtime listeners to the show, you'll probably be a little bit more aware of the unique changes that are coming to the public school system in this next school year. Particularly examples of that effect has been Nampa has had to close schools and other districts have made some hard decisions. But one of the more unique ones that seems to be sweeping the state is the likes of 4-day school weeks, which you might have forgotten about and heard about, or just never heard about at all. In this segment, we'll examine some of those new policies that parents and students will see when they go back to school this season. The first one and the biggest one, like I teased here in the hook, was the 4-day school weeks. Depending where you're at in the state, you may be more or less familiar with this, but 4-day school weeks have been a growing trend in Idaho schools. In total, the state has roughly 179 schools. Out of those, 85 school districts / charter schools have a 5-day school week, which we're all familiar with. But 94 school districts / charter schools have 4-day school weeks. So that's about 53% of the state running on a 4-day school week now. The most recent addition and the largest has been the Nampa School District, which just decided to move to a 4-day school week starting this year. Idaho Falls, Emmett, and Teton schools have also decided to begin next year, with Kellogg moving towards it as well. Now, with that can come some concerns. Like anything with education, it's all about the performance element, right? How is this performing? Is this good for the students? Is it not? And a mixed bag there. Payette School District, which adopted a 4-day school week in 2020, so about 4 years now, saw graduation rates decrease from 70.5% to 56.5%, so not great on that. but the chronic amount of students not coming to class improved from 29.9% in 2021 to 18.7% in 2023. A little bit of improvement to getting students in the seats. Teacher retention decreased from 87.1% in 2021 to 74% in 2023. A mixed bag there when we're looking at results. Some of it's good, some of it's bad, just depends on your objective you're going for there. As for the community response to it, the reaction is varied among families. Some appreciate the flexibility for appointments and family times, while there are some that treat the public school system more like a childcare thing, and it's a little bit more difficult for that day off because they have to figure out the schedule a little bit more differently there. As for struggles, there actually has been a recent one with a bill that came through. The Idaho State Board of Education's, or ISBE, has set a minimum of 152 instructional days per school year, effective from 2025 to 26 school year. This decision, as I alluded to earlier, comes by House Bill 521, which requires schools to meet or exceed the minimum days set by the board to be eligible for state funding. Moving into this, on average, and how schools will probably approach this, 4-day schools will need to add about 6 more instructional days to their calendar to meet that requirement. With 152 days required, the average 4-day school does about 146. So that works out to being an extra 6 days they'll have to figure out there. Probably they'll just add an extra week on or something like that, or 2. Granted, I wouldn't worry too much per se if you're in one of those districts that, oh no, the school is going to go really crazy. This doesn't go into effect until July 1st of next year. So most of the schools for this whole next session won't have to worry about that into the fall and the spring sessions of the public school. It'll just become a stickler once we get into the fall school year in 2025. Now, I did tease it. There are a couple other odd things, and depending on where you are in the state, they'll be unique. The Emmett School District is considering restricting smartphone use in classrooms for this upcoming year. There's kind of 2 ways they're looking at this, the board. One of them would completely bar students from using smartphones during the school day. The other would just require students to lock up their phones before class. Depending on how they're going to take that hasn't been decided yet, but if you're over in Emmett or Gem County, you may want to reach out or be involved in those talks if you agree or disagree. Another one which we've actually talked about, a little bit of a shameless plug, we did an Idaho Bill breakdown on it. House Bill 597 now allows students 18 or older to opt out of immunization requirements by their school, college, university, or career technical programs. So if you're in higher education and you don't want to get any jabs, that is something you can now do thanks to Idaho law. And then my second to last one is diversity statement restrictions. Senate Bill 1274 has explicitly barred colleges and universities from using diversity statements as a condition for employee hiring and student admission. So if you're a student trying to get into a school or higher education place here in Idaho, you cannot be restricted based on diversity standards and stuff, or if you're getting employed by the school as well. So that's a new thing there if you're going back to school or looking to be hired. And then the last one, which we also literally talked about last week, is House Bill 710 and its effect on school libraries. I'm not going to go super deep into this because we've done a full Idaho Bill breakdown if you're curious about it. But basically, it causes school libraries to have to relocate materials that are deemed harmful for minors to an adult-only section, or just get rid of them at all. And then within 60 days, a complaint can be filed. And if they don't remove those within 60 days, so if they're not compliant, person files things, they have 60 days to respond, they can be sued. Much of the material stated in the bill is sexual content, nudity, often stuff with sexual homosexuality and stuff like that. If you're more interested there, again, go check our Idaho Bill breakdown. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on that. But overall, the implications of all of this is that there's a 50-50 chance when you're going back to school here in Idaho, you'll be going to a 4-day school, actually a little bit better than 50-50. But there's still more coming and being decided on. It might be not this year, and it might be next year. If you're over in Emmett, and some schools may copy it, you might see smartphone usage be a little bit more curtailed or regulated in public schools. You might also see immunization prevention. I know that's something that has been big in Idaho. We did a story or something on that. We have some of the lowest non-immunization rates in the nation, and the National Health Department isn't very happy about that, but that's a different thing. Plus the House Bill 710 and the restrictions on books and different stuff there. But the main part for this segment I want to focus on is mainly the 4-day school week. And the first thing I thought when I was researching this is why the increased interest in doing this. And we can go through these. I wrote down a couple different things I researched, the reasons why, and we can break them down. The first one is teacher recruitment and retention that's put forward. Many districts, especially rural ones, use the 4-day week as a tool to attract and retain teachers, adding a little extra benefit and stuff that, hey, you're getting the same amount, but you're getting an extra day off. As we saw earlier with the Payette County one or Payette School District, that doesn't seem to have worked too well, but I could see where the administrative or the districts or the boards for those could see where it is a selling point. Oftentimes, I would say in a rural community, it might be more the money side of it, but that's a different thing. And speaking of money, the next one that I saw was cost savings. Although the savings aren't often huge, typically about 0.4% to 2.5% on the overall budget for schools. Some districts who are a bit smaller and tighter on their budget can see it as a huge savings. If you can save 2.5% of your overall budget, you can put that to more curriculum or maintenance or different things on the building. The other one is improving attendance, which we did see earlier actually does work. Like in Payette, it's improved the number of students that will just stay and will avoid school and different stuff if they have parents that aren't going to get after them or punishments or different things. It just seems to make that pill a little easier to swallow for some students. Also, the community support side of it, parents and students, obviously, if they don't have to be in school any longer than they don't have to be, is nicer. So there's been some support, and that's another thing that just people like it. And with that comes like the flexibility for appointments, and also the argument, which is an interesting one, especially here in Idaho, that it allows for more family time, that the student is at school less. They can be with their family and build those deeper relationships with their parents and dads and different stuff, which from a homeschooling perspective, which I come from, I don't have too much actually of an objection to that. If you're a person who's, I can't do the majority of the education, but if I get an extra day more with them, that's awesome for me. Yeah, my wife, maybe she stayed home and there's other difficulties, but hey, I get one extra day to spend with them. And also some more employers seem to be moving towards that 4-week model as well. So if you're someone who's in that weird sweet spot where you get both of those, then you have a 3-day weekend with your kids. I actually don't see too much of an issue there as long as the kids are getting educated. The other one that we also hear a bit of is like teacher burnout, that it's just too much stress. There's a lot of things going on. And there again, it comes to that overall sense of trying to make life easier for the teachers, making it less of a high pace for it. A lot of the schools use that extra day as being a day where the teachers can do all their organizing and teaching and planning and work day for stuff that's not student teaching related. So they're not as crazily crammed on the days when school is in session. And just generally, the other last point I found, and I know it's a funny one, but I think it's a relevant one because it does happen. We are human. Is that it's a trend. With over 50% of the schools in the state doing it, there might be more schools that otherwise be like, that's weird. But then we're like, they said yes, and they said yes, and they said yes, and they all said yes. It starts to become a snowballing effect of, if everyone else is doing it, maybe it is a good thing. Maybe I should check into it. Maybe I should look at it. And I would hope as leaders, they would do a little bit more research, but that also can be a factor affecting schools where they're considering more than they would have before. As for kind of my personal take on this, is that public schools are struggling a little bit right now, especially with the conservative legislature, which is only getting more, which is not very friendly to them, we'll put it that way. On top of what we heard earlier with abortion stuff being pushed out of the curriculum, funding being curtailed, a lot of bonds and levies, just the average Idaho person is not voting for more funding to public schools. There is this growing trend, even if it's not in Idaho, I don't deny that there are probably great people in the public school system that are educating and great, but overall the viewpoint, and I would agree with, is that the source, the root which the public school system is growing out of, the broader public school education system in the United States, is really not one which lines up or agrees with the values that us as Idahoans hold. So you're seeing this growing tension, which then has forced the public school for once in its life to have to figure out where to cut things, to be more efficient with how it's doing things, which in Idaho, it hasn't had to do that for a long time. If you look at the budget, almost year over year on average, the legislature approves more funding and more funding and more funding, to the point that education is one of our top 3 biggest things on our budget that Idaho spends money on. I think it's in the billion. I know, crazy that we spend $1 billion. We're like the federal government. Woo! Not. But that slowly that is being curtailed. It's not being given as much. Funding isn't being given as much. And so public schools are trying to face this weird thing of, oh, wait a second, there isn't going to be a limitless flow of funds. We're actually hitting a ceiling here. We're running into issues. We have to be competitive. And Some public schools, I think, are learning smartly, and they're like, hey, can't do these programs. We got to cut these. The performance and the benefits of the student isn't worth it. Cut it. And I think that's a perfectly fine thing, even as a person who didn't go through public school system. And if I'm trying to set aside maybe my grievances or issues with it, if a public school can do that and say, this isn't performing well for the student, that's where we move our funds. That's perfectly fine. But if you're getting so much funding where you're able to just put it everywhere and never have to cut anything, that's a little bit of a problem there. Some schools are in this quandary of having to decide, cut programs or don't cut any programs, but we need to save money and we need it for building and this and that, and they're looking everywhere. And so what ends up happening is, oh wait, let's just shorten the school week. The parents like it. We spend less money on power. The teachers in class are in class a lot less. They can get a part-time job or maybe something. We can maybe pay them a little less. Just in general, we can save money, but we can keep everything type of attitude. I didn't see per se too much of that in the reading I was getting, but I wouldn't be shocked if that's what plays out as we see forward. It was really hard because there again, a lot of these hearings you can go to and listen to. Please, if you're in these counties, in these districts, go to them. But a lot of them, they don't actually post their results or numbers publicly. They do get reported back to the educational board, but I wasn't able per se to find them for myself. But I wouldn't be shocked, as you as the individual could probably more easily get in your county or district. I wouldn't be shocked if the schools that are moving towards not always, but moving towards more of a 4-day week schedule are the ones that are the least likely to cut programs. The ones that are willing to cut programs and be more efficient with their time are probably the ones that are not moving as reticently to a 4-day school week. But if you disagree with me, please comment down below or email me. But sadly, that brings us to the end of the episode. Thank you for listening and tuning into the whole thing. I hope you found it both enjoyable and informative. If we missed anything important or got something wrong, please reach out to us by email at lyimedia@protonmail.com or by tweeting me at localyocalidaho. We appreciate your support and feedback as we work to get you the most interesting and important stories across Idaho. That's all for now. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Godspeed.